There is a real case for Rudy Gobert to be Defensive Player of the Year for the 5th time in his career. Why I and Chris Finch thinks Rudy Gobert should and could win Defensive Player of the Year next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, part of now the number one sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with the college basketball parlay profit boost. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It's finally a game day. We're going to talk Wolves-Lakers a little bit later in the show. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of the daily Locked On Wolves podcast. We're going to start today with the case for Rudy Gobert to be Defensive Player of the Year. I'm not the only one that thinks it could happen. Well, should possibly happen. I don't know that it could happen given the odds. We'll talk about the FanDuel odds and some of that stuff. But Chris Finch spoke the other day about how he thinks Rudy Gobert should be Defensive Player of the Year. Of course, he's going to say that. He's a little biased. But there's a case to be made. And really, there's only three guys that should even be considered. So we're going to talk a little bit about Rudy Gobert in comparison with Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren, who are both ahead of Rudy Gobert in the odds on FanDuel for who should or who might win Defensive Player of the Year this year. But I'll make the case for Rudy. I think there's a pretty compelling case for Rudy Gobert to win Defensive Player of the Year, given the Timberwolves' team defensive success and Rudy's role within that. So we'll break that down. We'll talk about some of the surprising numbers. I'll talk about my favorite thing, which is opposing teams thinking that they can exploit Rudy for profit in one-on-one situations, which is just nothing could be further from the truth. So we'll talk about what the numbers say about that. I was delighted to pull those and a few other items. We'll also talk about Naz Reid's 6th Man of the Year candidacy a little bit, and then we'll close by talking Wolves-Lakers. Big matchup tonight in the Western Conference. So we'll close the show with that and a bit of Western Conference standings discussion as well. Big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. All right, so Rudy Gobert has won not consecutive. That would be crazy. 4 total Defensive Player of the Year awards. John Krasinski of The Athletic had a quote on Twitter where he talked about how he says that Gobert is, quote, far and away the leader for Defensive Player of the Year, which, of course, on FanDuel, he's not. We'll talk about the odds here in a second. Finch said his ISO defense has been the top or near the top all year long. He drives the defense. The on-off numbers for us speak volumes to his importance. He takes our offense to a whole nother level. There's nothing he can't do defensively. Okay, so first, let's talk about the odds. Right now, Victor Wembanyama is by far the favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year. Minus 1,500. Okay, Chet Holmgren second at plus 1,000, which is a pretty distant second compared to minus 1,500. And Rudy is by himself in third place at plus 5,000. A few other guys are behind him that actually have odds, like Scotty Barnes is plus 10,000, which is just insane. Alcer Thompson at plus 25,000, Abim Adebayo at plus 25,000. Why even bother at that point to have them listed? But Gobert's a pretty distant third. And what Chris Finch said is kind of what I want to dig in on. And that's what the numbers say about Rudy compared to really anybody else in the league. And I don't think on-off is the best stat to use. I'm going to mention it because I think there's some context there that is relevant. I do want to start with the isolation numbers, the overall defensive numbers over at Synergy. Depending, like, you can find different numbers. You can find play types are classified as different things in different places. So what I did is I went to Synergy and I went to overall individual defense. And I looked at the different situations. You could go to ISO, you go to pick and roll ball handler, you can go to pick and roll man, but all that is kind of dependent on what Gobert does in a specific coverage in a specific situation. And I think it makes more sense to just pull the overall individual defense, which pulls in all those different play types, and however they're divided on synergy, and it puts it together. And I think that's the best, most all-encompassing way to look at this. Believe it or not, Gobert is number one in the entire NBA in possessions defended individually. So again, what that would mean is if the opposing team comes down, they're in isolation, they run a play for an isolation set, and Gobert has the coverage. Or there's a pick and roll, the Timberwolves switch it, Gobert ends up on the ball handler. So that's not classed as an ISO, that's classed as a ball handler in pick and roll, ball handler in a pick and roll situation. Okay. If he sticks with the roller, now he's guarding the roller, right? It might seem obvious, but a lot of times he's functionally, if you're watching the game, he's guarding in isolation, but on the stat sheet, the advanced stat sheet, if you will, advanced screen, he's actually guarding the ball handler in a pick and roll situation. So I took the big number. He's got the most possessions under his belt by almost 100. He's guarded 1,129 possessions this season. The only other player over 1,000 is Donovan Clingan of the Blazers. He's done a 1040. What is that? 89 possessions less than Gobert. So at any rate, he's guarded the most possessions of anybody else. Gobert's allowed points per possession of just 0.912, which is super low. So if you sort by number of possessions guarded, and I'm going to make a case here for why, volume matters. Obviously it matters, but it matters a lot. If you scroll down in terms of this group of guys sorted by possession, you have to go to number 14 before you find somebody that has a better points per possession against than Rudy Gobert, and it's barely. It's Cason Wallace, who's a perimeter defender on the league's best defense, and he's a 0.914. Gobert's a 0.912. Oh, wait, that's actually better. You got to keep scrolling then. You got to keep scrolling. I missed that one. So you get to – that's actually worse too. Derek White at 19 is slightly worse. You got to go all the way down to Wemby at 22, who's 0.910 compared to Gobert's 0.912. You got to go all the way down to 22. And Wemby has guarded 797 possessions compared to 1129. So what is that? 300 and I'm going to try and do this math again, I guess. Almost 400 possessions more Gobert has guarded. And his points per possession compared to Wemby's is almost identical. And obviously the more volume you have, the more difficult it is to keep that points per possession so low. We could look at field goal percentage against, effective field goal percentage against. Obviously, those things are all pretty closely tied together. It's the same deal. To find another effective field goal percentage against, Cason Wallace is slightly better, 41.7% versus 41.9% for Rudy. It's the same situation. You got to go down to Wemby. So if you want to talk about, and by the way, it's Rudy and it's Wemby and it is Chet Holmgren. Like those three guys, Chet, you got to go down a lot further in terms of possessions. He's 39th in possessions guarded at 728, but his is actually better than both Rudy and Wemby, 0.897 points per possession against, which is nuts. But again, the volume is almost, what did I say, 7 something? It's like almost 500 possessions less than Rudy, which is crazy. But anyway, that's the point I'm making here, is that the volume for Rudy is incredible. And the efficiency, the defensive efficiency is right in line with these guys who are also incredible, but have guarded a lot less possessions than Rudy Gobert. And these teams, you see it night after night. And I emphasized it just the other day. I think it was the Orlando game. It must have been the game before that, where these teams think that it's some crazy matchup advantage they get. Oh, we've got Rudy, who's a big, on this guard, who's a small. Everybody's been taught since they were in middle school that this is what you want. You got the mismatch. Guys, he's a 4-time defensive player of the year. I don't care who you are. And it goes back to like the Luka 3 in the conference finals a couple years ago that has been played incessantly. Dude's at that time, the best, most skilled offensive player in the league. And he's, still top 5 in that regard. I would say Luka is. Obviously he's going to win some of the time. What about the possessions right before that Gobert won in isolation? There aren't many guys that can hit that step back 3. That is not on Rudy. It's actually not a great shot for Luka, and he'd failed trying that previously over Rudy Gobert. That was the time that it worked. Gobert is phenomenal in those situations. You see these guys like, the Jamal Sheds of the world that tried it on Thursday, and these other guys who are like, oh, okay, I got Rudy on me. I'm going to own Rudy like Luka, or I'm going to own Rudy like the other, who dunked on him a week ago or so. Like, the number of times that it doesn't work, we could make an easy compilation of just dudes flailing away against Rudy Gobert and him shutting them down. And it is hilarious. And the Wolves coaching staff loves it. And Chris Finch mentions it in this quote, that how good he is in isolation. And it's just amazing that other teams don't recognize it, that other coaching staffs, and they may tell them, they may say, hey, if you get Rudy one-on-one, if you know what you should do is generate a shot for someone else heading to the rim. Find a cutter because Rudy's pulled away from the rim. These other coaching staffs, I'm sure that the good ones at least are telling their guys, hey, if you get this quote unquote mismatch, it's not a mismatch. He's the best in the league at this. Find somebody cutting to the rim, get a shot up on the rim, because Rudy and his rebounding and his rim protection, his shot blocking ability is not near the rim. He's out on the perimeter. Get the ball to someone else that doesn't have to face Rudy Gobert. Why would you choose to go against the best defender on the floor instead of give somebody else the ball when the best defender on the floor is away from the rim and can't contest a shot and can't grab a defensive rebound? It's completely asinine, and it obviously favors the Timberwolves, and I love that it happens on a nightly basis. I want to talk also about the on-off stuff that Finch references, because I think it's important, even though it's not the end-all be-all. I'll explain what I mean by that, because it's important to have context, and I think there is context that's favorable for Rudy, and maybe even gives him a little bit of an edge in some areas over Chet Holmgren and Victor Wembanyama. As incredible as those guys are, I could continue to make this case here by looking at some of the on-off stuff. So we'll do that here next, and then we'll get into the Naz Reid 6th Man of the Year discussion following that. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, with the fans. All you got to do is pull up the Game Time app, pick an upcoming NBA game. You'll get your tickets locked in within minutes. Of course, the Wolves are on a 4-game road trip right now. If you happen to be in the LA area, they play in LA Tuesday and Wednesday, and then they close out the road trip. I forget where they are Friday, but they close the road trip on Sunday in Oklahoma City, and then they'll be back home. You can get to Target Center. See your all-in price up front on Game Time with no surprise fees at checkout. You'll be able to see the view from your seat before you buy, which helps make your decision easy. Plus, zone deals stand out. You can choose your section. Game Time will pick your seats, and you will save. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not gametime.com. A reminder, if you've been thinking about joining the Everydayer Club, now is the time. Again, you get ad-free shows and access to the group chat on Discord, which is always hopping. We're always in there talking all things Wolves. Really got interesting around trade deadline. There's a handful of us that are having a great time. I'm going to start to post in there during games, maybe at halftime of games, and then post-game, some quick thoughts before recording the show after games. Try this out tonight during and after the Lakers game. If you get signed up before the NCAA tournament kicks off next week, you can get into our Everydayer Club bracket pool on Discord for a chance to win Locked On merch. It should be a ton of fun. Right now, you can use the code MARCH to get your first month free. Head to lockedonwolves.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes. Again, code MARCH to get your first month free. All right. Let's talk a little more Rudy. So we talked about the ISO numbers, or I should say the overall numbers of him in coverage and how amazing it is. The similarities between he and Wemby and Chet, and the chasm really between them and anybody else. And for Rudy, the volume, I think, matters quite a bit because for a couple of reasons. One, the number of minutes he plays. Obviously, Wemby's been under minutes restrictions. He's missed some time. Chet, similar. He's missed some games. And then also the way the Wolves defend is they allow Rudy to be on an island. And again, it goes back to the last point I made at the end of the last segment. Teams are like, all right, let's get this mismatch. The Wolves are like, all right, you can have this quote unquote mismatch because it isn't that. It's not what you think it is. The difference, I think the on-off stuff really stands out. And Chris Finch mentions the on-off numbers speaking volumes to Rudy's importance. And to illustrate what he's talking about, we could just go to cleaning the glass, which I think is the best place to look at the on-off stuff. Rudy Gobert is the second best overall on-off differential on the team, but as we talked about before, and this has continued to be drastic throughout the season, the Wolves offense is worse with him on the floor, but the defense is 13.1 points better. It's a 99th percentile defensive on-off difference, a minus 13.1, okay? So compare that to Victor Wembanyama, who's also 99th percentile, but the number is just, quote unquote, just a minus 12.2. Okay. That matters. Look at the Thunder. Chet is a 91st percentile defensive on off. The Thunder are minus 6.5. Minus sounds bad. Let me say that a different way. They're 6.5 points better defensively with Chet Holmgren on the floor versus off the floor. The Thunder are 6.5 points better with Chet on the floor defensively than they are with him off the floor. The Spurs are 12.2 points better with Wemby on the floor defensively, and the Wolves are 13.1 points better with Rudy on the floor. Okay, so Rudy's number is obviously the best. The obvious counterpoint to on-off numbers in any context is, well, it also speaks to who is replacing them in the lineup, right? It speaks to the depth of a team. So you could argue the Timberwolves just don't have as much big man depth, or at least defensive front court depth, as the Spurs and the Thunder. I don't necessarily think that's true. Actually, Naz's defensive on-off is good this year as well. So I don't necessarily think that's the case. But I think it's pretty easy, relatively easy, to make the argument that the surrounding players, not simply the defense or the bench that comes in when Rudy sits, that makes the number look that much more dramatic, but it's also the other defensive infrastructure around the player and the other perimeter guys, right? So the Thunder, Chet Holmgren has Case and Wallace, right? Case and Wallace, who I mentioned earlier, was in the same neighborhood as Rudy in terms of overall points per possession against. Like Case and Wallace, and also, by the way, he's 14th in terms of frequency of possessions where guys go at him, where possessions that get logged on synergy, and he's allowing. He's 14th. He's allowing just 0.914 points per possession, which is just 0.02 of a point per possession worse than Rudy. And like that's the only stratosphere that the only guys that are in that stratosphere are him, Case and Wallace, Derek White, Wemby, Rudy, and Chet Holmgren. That's it. And Case and Wallace is on Chet's team, and he carries a lot of weight there. There's now Jaden McDaniels is not quite in that stratosphere this year. Frequency, he is. He's actually 5th in defensive possessions individually in terms of frequency, but the points per possession is 0.948, which is like it is really good. It's in the Dyson Daniels, like let's see who else, Amen Thompson realm, not quite in the Case and Wallace, Derek White, Rudy, Chet, Wemby realm. Okay, so really good, but not as good. So the Case and Wallace impact and the overall defensive infrastructure of the Thunder impact matters as well. And again, I guess I would look at the overall numbers on the season when it comes to team defense. OKC's got the best defense by far in the league, allowing just 107.2 points per 100 possessions, which is 2.4 points per 100 possessions better than Detroit, who's number 2. San Antonio's the third defense, which is another 1.6 points behind Detroit. Minnesota's 7th at 112.9. So Minnesota's given up 1.7 points more per 100 possessions than San Antonio and 5.7 more than OKC, which puts the on-off in even more perspective because the defense without Rudy is horrendous. The defense with Rudy is amazing. Again, with Rudy on the floor, let's see. I guess I got to go to lineups to get that number. But with Rudy on the floor, the Timberwolves defense is I would argue positively. I don't need to argue. I could just look at the number. Relatively speaking, it's Thunder-esque. Here, I'll just pull it right now. I'll give you the number. I'll do this quote unquote live. With Rudy on the floor, the Timberwolves defense is putting up 108.3 points per 100 possessions, 108.3. That would put them second in the NBA. If the Wolves defense, if Rudy played 48 minutes a game, right? The Wolves defense is 108.3 per 100 possessions. That's only behind OKC. It's ahead of Detroit. So it'd be number 2 in the league. With Rudy off the floor, the opposite is true, as you might expect. And again, this isn't quite the same as the straight on-off numbers, but the Timberwolves team defense with Rudy off the floor is a 121.4, which would be tied for the third worst defense in the league, better than only Utah and Washington, tied with Sacramento for the third worst defense in the league. Worse than Brooklyn, worse than Milwaukee, worse than the Pacers, the Pelicans, Denver, going up the list. That matters quite a bit. And those numbers are even more dramatic than the San Antonio numbers. And again, that matters. The context matters. And again, the volume matters. So I think given the volume, given the infrastructure of the team around them, given that OKC is the league's best defense and the Spurs are the league's third best defense, I can see, you could make the argument that those are reasons for those players to win it. But again, the difference between the importance level, the infrastructure being there, that the Spurs with Victor Wembanyama off the floor can still be as good as they are. I'll tell you what it is right now. The Spurs defensive unit with Victor Wembanyama off the floor is still a 117.2, which is not great, but it would be borderline middle tier. It'd be 21st in the NBA. Whereas the Wolves without Rudy are tied for 28th. So again, the difference is even more dramatic. And because of the volume Rudy has played, more than Wemby, more than Chet, not blaming them for their injuries, their absences, their minutes limits, whatever the case might be, we can't ignore that. We can't ignore the additional minutes and possessions that Rudy has used, and the efficiency is maintained. It's virtually the same. It's in the same stratosphere as those other guys, whereas nobody else is. And those guys have all three of those guys have a huge impact on the game. So the odds to me are a little out of whack. I get why Wemby will likely win it, but I think the odds should be a lot closer between Rudy, Wemby, and Chet, and I think there's a real argument to be made for sure. All right, let's hit the Naz Reid stuff very quickly, and then we'll move into Wolves-Lakers. We'll do all that here next to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at TurboTax. It's tax time, but for a lot of us, the old way of doing taxes is, well, it's a lot. Trying to book an appointment, that's not the most convenient. Sitting in a waiting room with a stack of papers, emailing back and forth, and wondering if they really get your situation. But this year, you're getting a major upgrade. Intuit TurboTax now has in-person locations nationwide. You can meet face-to-face with a real tax expert, and your documents get uploaded straight to your TurboTax app on the spot. And just like that, you're done. Your TurboTax expert works to get you every dollar you deserve. Well, you get real-time notifications as you go about your day. It's the relief of walking in and meeting a real person and walking out knowing your taxes are being handled right. Head to TurboTax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment. That's TurboTax.com/local to find a store near you and book your appointment. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. College basketball is nonstop. Big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board. And now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay that you want. Look at rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever fits as we move into conference tournament week, into the big tournament starting next week. You can mix spreads, totals, player props, whatever to match how you see the slate playing out. Then you can apply the profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. Of course, the Gophers aren't going to be, unless they go on just an incredible historic run in the Big Ten tournament, they're not going to be in the dance. But there's lots of Big Ten teams that I think, as much as we love to hate Big Ten teams, if you're a Gophers fan or a Big Ten fan, it's fun to see Big Ten teams do well in the tournament. They've done better recently than in prior years. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all season. It's your parlay, your style, now with more upside behind it. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. All right, I wanted to quickly touch on the Naz Reid 6 Man of the Year case. This one's a little, well, Nas certainly, like, he's actually the favorite right now to win Sixth Man of the Year. So it's an easier case to make. But I don't know. It's for some reason it's less fun. I think it's because of how polarizing the Rudy Gobert thing is, and I just don't understand how much people love to hate Rudy Gobert on a national level. I think the former players thing, some of the current players, it's just maddening to me. Sixth Man of the Year, obviously Nas has already won it. He's plus 150 to win, so he's the favorite. He's not the odds-on favorite in the same way that Wemby is for Defensive Player of the Year. Reed Shepard's plus 350, and so is Jaime Jaquez Jr. of the Heat. Both at 350, of course, Shepard of the Houston Rockets and Nas at plus 150. So he's not a big favorite. And this is still very much a discussion. And so it's something we'll come back to here over the final 5 weeks or so of the season. But comparing their stats, I mean, there's some things that Shepard does better than Nas. He's a better three-point shooter. Now, Nas, the last couple of years was better than this year. This year, he's just a shade above league average at 37.7%. Reed Shepard is just under 40%. Points per game, which is, of course, not the right way to measure, well, really anything. But Nas has a very slight edge, 13.8 points per game over 13.6 for Reed, but he also plays slightly more minutes. He shoots two-pointers better than Reed Shepard, although he shoots, well, actually, no, he does shoot more two-pointers than Reed Shepard, being a big and not a guard, even though he plays like a guard. He gets to the line a little bit more. Defensively, I would argue Naz Reid's the better defender. Shepard, I think, has been a little bit better than expected so early as such a diminutive guard. However, teams still can kind of hunt Reed Shepard, and I think Naz has more than held his own. I mentioned earlier the on-off numbers defensively for Naz actually are pretty favorable, and as long as he's not with Julius Randle is really the one that tanks some of that. I don't think Naz has been bad defensively. I think he's held up pretty well on the glass this season. So some of those kind of ancillary statistical categories I feel like are helpful for Naz Reid. So I would argue that, and I should mention Jaime Jaquez Jr. as well. I think he's clearly the one that doesn't quite fit here. I think team success for both the Rockets and Wolves help with Naz and Reid, and that matters with an award like this over what the Heat have done and / not done in the East. Obviously, they're still in the thick of things, but season's not gone quite as advertised for them or as expected for them. Some of the advanced stuff is a little bit Naz's favor. He certainly has a better true shooting percentage. The effective field goal percentage is better. I just think he's a slightly more efficient player and slightly more important to the Timberwolves' success based on how important getting front court production is, and also the bench production that Naz provides. It's very close. In fact, I actually think the odds should be virtually even in FanDuel. So I feel like Rudy's being disrespected and Naz is maybe getting a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Weirdly enough, even as a past one-time winner of Sixth Man of the Year, Naz gets this benefit, this bump in the odds, whereas Rudy has won Defensive Player of the Year 4 times. And while I get why Wemby's the favorite, Rudy's in third. Wemby's, what did I say, minus 150, and Rudy's like plus 10,000 or plus 1,000, which is just crazy. Or plus 1,000, I think. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But Naz has a real shot at winning Sixth Man of the Year. This is something we'll keep an eye on. We'll talk more about here as we move forward for sure. All right, let's talk Wolves-Lakers. Of course, the Timberwolves have not seen the Lakers since October. Minnesota played them. I think it was the Lakers opener, but it was the Timberwolves' second game of the year, if I remember right, way back in October. The Wolves got blown out in LA, and there was no LeBron in that game, but Luka Doncic did play. And then in game 2, which was 5 days later at Target Center, neither Luka or LeBron played, and Austin Reeves had an extremely good game, and the Lakers outlasted the Wolves by 1 point. So at the time, coming out of that game, the Wolves were 2-3. The Lakers were 3-2. Reeves had 28 and some clutch shots in that game. Jake LaRavia scored 27 points in that game for the Lakers. Now, important to note a couple things here. Number one, both LeBron and Luka are expected to play in this game. So that matters quite a bit, obviously, compared to the first 2 times. So we've seen Luka 1 time and LeBron 0 times overall this season. Rotation-wise, the Lakers are virtually the same team. The biggest difference is they added Luke Kennard at the trade deadline, and he's, making an impact. He is what he is, a bad defender, aging, undersized, a good shooter, and not a whole lot else at this point for them. The rotation's a little different. We're getting a little less Jared Vanderbilt and Jake LaRavia, maybe a little more Jackson Hayes, a lot more Marcus Smart. Like, it just looks a little different. even though it's the same cast of characters. The Lakers have been very good here of late. They've won 5 of their last 6 games, or 6 of their last 7. 5 of their last 6 games. Overall, since the All-Star break, they're 6-4, and they've had a top. Let's see. Let me grab the number here. I think they've had a top, 12 offense since the All-Star break, and the defense has been pretty good too. Or actually, I flipped those. They're 11th in defense. They're 6th in offense since the All-Star break. 6-4 during that span. They've shot the lights out. They're second in the league in effective field goal percentage over their last 10 at 58.2%. Defensively, they've been a little better than the middle of the pack across the board. They're really doing everything except for offensive rebound the basketball well. It's a dangerous team offensively. I don't really understand how the defense has been that good. Well, I do a little bit. I mean, you can look at the schedule they've played. I bet you they've won 5 of the last 6. They just beat the Knicks by 13, which is impressive. They've also beaten the Pacers, Pelicans, Kings during that stretch, and the Steph-less Warriors, of course, Jimmy Butler-less Warriors. They beat them by 28. So those are their wins. The offense has been good, which has been pretty good all season. But look at how bad those defenses are. The Pelicans, the Kings, the Pacers, all bottom third defenses. The Knicks are decent. The Warriors have been pretty good defensively. But again, a shell of what the Warriors were back at the beginning of the season. So I think some of what the Lakers have done has been inflated here recently. I don't have any doubt the Wolves are still the better team. It doesn't necessarily mean that like I feel good about picking the Wolves to win this game. In LA, it's a late NBC game. It's a 10 p.m. Central tip, which is just crazy. Right now, the Timberwolves are favored by 2.5 points as of this recording. In LA against the Lakers on national TV, that feels about right. If I had to make a pick, I would pick the Wolves. I guess I would take the -2.5 versus just straight money line. I don't know. I don't mind the Lakers matchup. Obviously, the Wolves won the playoff series in 5 games last year. I just this is another one of those. I mean, it is bright lights. It is LA. It is national TV. Even though they laid an egg there in LA back in October, I feel like perhaps they get a bounce back here. So I don't know. I've talked myself into it. I don't mind the matchup. The big thing is obviously not allowing Luka to do what Luka does, and then making the other guys beat you, which is not too dissimilar from how you have to play OKC on that end of the floor. Obviously, the defense is much different. The Wolves should be able to run all over the Lakers. Minnesota is still top 10 in pace. And the Lakers defense is just, they got a lot of guys who don't exert a lot of effort on that end of the floor, don't play fast. Lakers are bottom third in pace. The Wolves are top third in pace. And the Lakers, again, for the season, are bottom third defense, although they've been good over the last 10. So definitely exploitable on that end of the floor. And, the Lakers allow, they're a little worse than middle of the pack in terms of opponent three-point shooting and frequency. So Minnesota should be able to do well there. And obviously the Lakers draw a lot of fouls. So the key is do your best to stay out of foul trouble. Do your best to not allow them to get into the penalty, like what we saw, last time out in that loss to the Magic. Minnesota fouled like crazy in that game. They have to avoid that against the Lakers. All right. So I got for you today here on the show. Of course, the live postcast with Jack and Luke will happen very late. It'll actually be very early on Wednesday morning for that. I will be back with the postgame pod on Wednesday morning as well. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. A reminder that if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Wolves ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedonwolves.supercast.com to join the club. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.